So our last session will be the appeal of Lamoni. Why you've been here, why you've lived here, why you've come back here. I have connections to all the Debarthes. Paul's the site director at Liberty Hall and always envisioning something new to do. Dave Debarthe, we lived in Centerville, Iowa. Larry was pastor, and he would always come help us. We'd have an issue, and he'd send me right over to help you with whatever that issue was. And Linda had my niece as a student. She's a very successful businesswoman, probably because of you. And then the last thing, we moved here in 1998. We moved 3 times in a year and a half because we kept renting houses and we kept selling. And so there was this group of movers that moved us. Finally, the third time they said, "You guys stay put. We're trying to move." So we stayed put. But I found this as I was walking out the door. This was given to me by Joe Debarthe, which is Dave and Paul's dad. And it was made 1999. So we just been here a year and he made this by hand, this wonderful box. So I have that sitting in my living room. So, and one more thing, if you meet the Debarthe woman, they are all strong women.
Well, thank you, Linda. It is a pleasure, a privilege to be here and to have a chance to address you. We've chosen the theme, the appeal of Lamoni. And I recognize you need to modify that. What are the appeals of Lamoni? And as we have listened to the presentations earlier these last 2 days, we have seen quite an assortment of them, with everything from being the organization of the Order of Enoch to be able to establish a place of people of peace. There's that effort toward a Zionic community. There's the simple fact that we've had good neighbors. And when good neighbors of an assortment of backgrounds come together and maintain generations of friendship, that is an awesome find, an awesome benefit to being alive. And of course, then we also have that appeal of family, because there is such a powerful sense of family here. For me, having returned after 55 years, I find now 15 families with whom I've had 5 generations of friendship. Now, I can't quite name all of the people. I just ran into Mr. Oger out at lunch, and it'd be Clyde and Catherine, were our neighbors up the road a little ways. His father is Malcolm, grandfather is Malcolm. I think his father's Casey. I think he's Caleb. So I'm missing one generation on that one. All right. But I can look at a number of others. I mean, the Lovings. Albert Loving was a missionary in Mexico, and I saw him in his home in southern Mexico. His son Paul was math teacher and a football coach at Lamoni High School. And his son Paul was my classmate. Joel Loving and his wife have been working here at Graceland. Casey, the Caseys, their daughter, and then their son is my pen pal. And so to be able to see the fascinating relationships of the Stahl family, I had the little boy in the Stahl family as a pen pal last year, and so there was another 5 generational relationship. It just fascinates me to see how many of them there are, and what a significant find that is. It's a powerful recognition of the benefit of community when you have multiple generations of friendship. I want to go back to begin with, though, on the attitude that Joseph Smith III brought to this community in terms of what its appeal should be. For in 1853, he had a vision in which he saw himself faced with an urban community where people were busily rushing around and getting prosperous and getting good names for themselves. And then he also saw himself in a place where it was a village, a quiet village in the countryside, no mountains, he mentioned. And the messenger beside him told him, you have to choose one or the other. It's not, it's a choice that you will find is irrevocable. Now, he was at that time in 1853, not yet married, working on his law degree and not involved in religious activities in particular, although here he was being pursued by the followers of Brigham Young. And so he gained pursuit by people who were followers of the new organization. But it was 30 years later, he records, that he was sitting in the Herald House and looking out his office to the west toward his home. And he looked down and there were people chatting at the street corner. Here was that village scene that he had seen 30 years earlier. He had chosen to go to be with the people in a place of peace. Lamoni was established to be a place and people of peace, and he came here with the Liberty Hall as the name of his home, where people would feel free to come discuss, to debate, to deliberate, to perhaps even argue, but to reason together in respect. That was one of his fundamental criteria, the reason for naming it Liberty Hall. He wanted people to feel free to discuss the issues, and in his day, in Lamoni, the issues were prohibition, women's rights, and so forth. And so they had a lot of discussions at Liberty Hall, and so we are having a monthly activity there. At the end of this next month, on the 28th, we have the World Poetry Day, which we're inviting kids, high school kids, to write a poem about the state of the world, college kids to write a poem about the state of the world, and we would present that and share and give us a chance to consider what is the state of the world from the vantage point of the community of Lamoni. And we have a $100 benefit for the person that wins that competition above those levels, presuming that they would get at least 3 poems. Well, it's just amazing to me as I look for volunteers to help out with projects at the Joseph Smith site or for the Lamoni Historical Association, that this community is full of volunteers. In 1875, James Stubbart married May. It may be that this Christmas cactus is descended from the one that they used. That is clearly possible. However, we know that it was used by Audrey Morford and John Stubbart on February 1st of 1911. And it's got little buds on here, and David says that his copy is blooming now, I think. And yeah,
It's blooming today, yeah.
Well, but let me emphasize here. Audrey Morford, we don't know what the motivation of the Morfords was to get them to come to Lamoni, but she married John Stubbart, John Stubbart, I'm sorry, it was John Stubbart. John Stubbart had grown up in the James Stubbart family on Silver Street, and my Aunt Carol tells that one of the things she learned from her father was that one day when he and his 2 brothers had a whole bunch of mulberries, they got diarrhea. And I was asking her about painting the Victorian houses with Victorian colors. And she said, oh, well, the Stubbart house was white, with the exception of a mulberry strip from the upper window down into the ground. So they had diarrhea. So that's what we can replicate, although we may not want to. And by the way, we are pursuing money from organizations that want to supply money for helping to paint Iowa, and other organizations that will hopefully help pay for the cost of painting to be able to get as many of the Victorian houses in Iowa and Lamoni painted with Victorian colors as we can. But anyway, I did want to get back to that story of the Stubbarts, because the Stubbarts are married to Debarthe, and therefore, well, when Abigail Barnes is writing her story about the families that have been here for 100 years, then ours gets to be counted, I hope. I know that she's working on the Barnes family, and they've got a a wealth of material. But look at how many families we have in this community that have been here for 100 years. Why? Generally, they come here, they like it. I certainly have liked coming back after 55 years. It has been a return to my home. I'm not sure I got through the rest of that because Audrey and John had that flower for 58 years. Their daughter Enid and Joe had it for 69 years of marriage. Their son Paul and Rena had it for 53 years of their marriage. David and Jan had it for 62 years, 62 years of their marriage. My daughter Hayata and Jeff Chapman have had 25 years of marriage, and she sends us this to come back to Lamoni to live in the Joseph Smith house as a living artifact. Something that you can come and pick a couple of leaves off and get a new start, particularly if you have somebody who wants to get married. Andre and Kelsey Ivanico have a new start off of this with their new marriage back in November. The fact that we've had these remarkably long-term marriages, perhaps not a direct connection, but on the other hand, look at the possibilities of how we witness together in a community. It's not just the people. It's people like Lori, who has the hugging tree out on the trail that she stops to see just about every day. And so, in respect to her, I appreciate that hugging tree as well. It's the plants, the animals. We go to the home pond around this trail, and we get to see the geese and the swans, and they fly that V to remind us of the victory that we need to be focusing upon. The goals we set can be victoriously accomplished if we follow the lessons of the geese. And so I try to encourage people to employ the lessons of the geese, to validate the goal, to verbalize the goal, to verify the goal, share it with somebody that can help you to make it happen. Then visualize that goal, keep it in sight every day, vitalize that goal, and make it so that every day you're tying your positive energy to it, and you can ultimately accomplish the victory. And having been a chess coach with 20 teams in the top 10 in the nation, I've seen how people who are on the margins can work together as a team and be successful. And so I want to encourage that we learn the lessons of the geese, because those are lessons that are being taught right here at Lamoni. Part of the reason I like that walk around the home pond, because there's that daily reminder. Don't forget the lessons of the geese, or the lessons of the tree, the lessons of the Christmas cactus. Everything around us giving evidence of the divine, attempting to teach us lessons. Well, I'm getting, let's see. I think maybe we got as far as Stubbords. We didn't ever get Jody Debarthe in here yet, so let me get that part. Probably one of the more remarkable experiences of our family is the fact that an 18-year-old Jody Debarthe was encouraged by his high school teacher in Cheyenne, Wyoming, that he should go to college. And my understanding is that they did some search and found there was a school in Texas and one in Iowa where a person could potentially work their way through. So at 18 years old, in 1931, Jody Debarthe, I suspect with maybe one change of clothes, maybe a blanket, and probably a pint jar of water, started walking from Cheyenne, Wyoming on a 500-mile hike to Lamoni, Iowa, and Graceland College. I understand that he took a vow in advance that he would not join the Mormons once he got there. But he arrived at Graceland, and Sherry Moraine's father saw him on campus, said he never saw anybody so dirty with such a big smile, wearing rags on his feet for the first 2 weeks. But he worked on a college farm, 10 cents an hour, made enough to be able to make it through those 2 years of college, went back to Wyoming, encountered Enid Stubbart. Ooh, that's part of the story I wanted to get back here. there were several families from Lamoni that went to Mateo Tipi between 1914 and 1916. The Coles, McElroys, Hartshorns, and the Stubbarts were the four that I immediately named, but they all settled near the Devil's Tower, and I think most of them were there for 20 years or so. And some came back to Lamoni, but others went to other places. Clifford Cole, one of the most famous of those. But while they were there, this young lady, Enid Debarthe, who was teaching school 20 miles or some miles from where Joe Debarthe was teaching, the two got acquainted. And my understanding is that Joe borrowed a team and wagon from John Stubbart. And I don't know for what purpose, but he apparently broke the two before they held the front wheels to the back wheels. And when you borrow something and break it like that, that's pretty bad news. Well, he didn't have a whole lot of recourse. He got his axe and chopped out a tree and spliced it in place where the two before had been, and took it back to John and apologized and explained to him. He said John Stubbart stroked his chin. John Stubbart didn't have a right thumb because he'd been shot off here in the morning. But he stroked his chin and said, "It looks to me like you did a pretty good job. I think we'll just leave it." And with that, Jody Wild said, "Maybe I better give that man's daughter another look." At her memorial, he commented that he had dated other beautiful women. Enid was not somebody that was considered physically attractive, but he began to recognize that if he had to have somebody pull him out of hell, she'd probably be the one that could do it. And he hadn't meant for her to have to do so. She had pulled him out several times. She was an awesome, powerful woman, I think is the phrase here, and has passed that on to her daughters, her granddaughters as well. Anyway, Joe and Enid then married near they met at the Devil's Tower, and in 1942, they loaded their kids, that would be David and Jerry, in the car and came to Lamoni. Dad had been here for 2 years. They had chosen to come to a place that he had found to be a pleasant community, a place where neighbors seemed to like each other. And he thought this was a good place to raise a family. This was a good place to farm. This is a good place to give kids an educational and religious opportunity. And so in winter, December of 1942, they made the trek across the plains, and David had a significant role in that one. I think maybe I should have let him share that. The car got really hot, as I understand.
They can't agree on the story.
Right? So it's, oh, yeah.
But no, you just keep going.
All right. My understanding is the dad put cardboard along the side of the motor so they could kick the heat back because it was December and the car didn't have a heater, so that provided the heater to come back to the manifold into the car. And it turned out to be a hot December. So as they crossed the plains and sandhills of Nebraska, they were hot and miserable. And the more they got hot and miserable, the more they thought maybe we should turn around and go back. And then a little boy in the back seat began singing to him.
There was no back seat. The Ford Coupe.
But go on.
Go ahead.
Well, anyway, my understanding is he started singing to them a song that he probably didn't even know. God will take care of you, be not afraid. So they kept coming to Lamoni. And they arrived at Lamoni and they needed a place to stay. They were taken in by Paul and Pearl Campbell. My understanding is that David got sick, and so he was about the same age as their son Glenn, who just died a couple of years ago and is commemorated in our Joseph Smith III yard on Memorial Day. But Paul and Pearl kept the Debarthes for about 3 months till they were able to acquire a farm. And then, for some reason, 3 years later, when the Debarthes had a little boy, they named him Paul. And when I grew up,
How many years later? Oh, three. Oh,
Three.
go ahead.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
That part's okay.
Go ahead.
Anyway, I grew up calling Uncle Paul, that is Paul Campbell was my Uncle Paul. And now I come to realize why. Perhaps you'd like to clarify and add to that.
Or maybe it's your turn now.
No, go ahead. We don't agree on the details. Dad bought the farm before we moved, or, you know, you go through that process. He bought the farm before they left Wyoming. So when they got here, some of you may know, back then there was a lot of sharecropping type thing. And everybody who was renting moved on the 1st of March. It was kind of a domino effect. You had to wait until the 1st of March to move in. So folks needed someplace to stay until the 1st of March. So they stayed with Paul and Pearl and Glenn and David until the 1st of March when they were able to move to their farm.
And was that the house right across from the Community of Christ Church? There on the corner?
David had that one later.
No, that was, okay,
They lived out in Evergreen.
okay.
And I was sick in Wyoming. One of the reasons they came, Paul blames it all on Dad. I blame it all on Mom. You know, sometimes. Mom had a dream or vision. I'm not sure which. Anyway, she concerned, what would you do? The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with David. So she had this dream or vision and was told, take your family and go back to the land of Zion. And so that was, from my perspective, the impetus for them to move back to Lamoni, Yes, Dad had been here, so he knew it. So you can put those two stories together.
Oh, there's a third, because the story I always heard was they were out in Wyoming, homesteading, and then the boys, well, Dad, got old enough for school, and there was no school nearby. And so they moved to Lamoni so their children could have good educations.
Since Dad was a one-room country school teacher who was teaching in the school, that story doesn't work for me, but that's all right. You can put all kinds of stories together. At least 1942, they came to Lamoni.
Well, and
We
Mom and
agree
Dad-
on that.
Joe and Enid were both teaching in one-room country schools, and my understanding is they had a dad, one had to clean out a cattle shed, one had to clean out a sheep shed in order to have a place for the students to meet. And then they had to gather up newspapers and books and anything they could from the neighbors so they could have reading materials. They didn't have chalkboards, and Dad used a shovel to cut the wall of the stream where the kids could then use the clay as the chalkboard. And apparently he found a comparable set for Mom's kids as well. And so I understood it was 20 miles apart, but he made that hike to quarter a little bit, and it worked out to our advantage. All right, they came to the north. They got the farm. Our neighbors across the road to the east and a little bit to the south, our neighbor was a gentleman by the name of Barnes. That was
Virgil.
Barnes. Virgil and Millie. Millie's right name. And I was always intrigued because theirs was a dugout. At least the garage part was a dugout, and I think they had a house up on top, but I think the original house may have been a dugout. It's the only one I'm aware of in the community. But it appears that it served as the effective residence for Virgil and Millie and their family. But then the northwest corner of our farm matched the Ben and Sadie farm. And so just a mile and a half from our original house was their house. And Ben and Sadie had Dick as Dick and William. And so here we've had Bill's family and Dick's family here presenting last night, and it was an awesome presentation. For me, a couple of personal elements there because I remember when I was a little boy, Mom and Dad were teaching us to pray, and the Barnes little boy fell down on the grate and got his face burned. And so we prayed for him. And you'll see this, Terry still carries the scars, but he healed. And a powerful message in there for me, we're bigger than our wounds. The message of the Christ is that we're always bigger than our wounds if we have belief. And then Judy had to fall from the truck, from the pickup. And she was unconscious for some time, and we prayed for her. And again, the miracle of returning life. And so here's a community in which we're not sharing common religion necessarily, but common belief in prayer. And then Abigail was out for a month in a coma, and the doctors indicated that she was very likely permanently damaged. We prayed for her. After 5 weeks, I went over to Lincoln to pray for her in the rehab hospital. When I walked into A19, to my amazement, she was sitting up, being fed by a nurse. So I stopped in the doorway and I waved my hand and I said, "Hi, Abby." And she looked up at me and she waved her hand and said, "Hi, Paul." I ran over to give her a hug and she said, "I planted trees on your farm." And she had. She and Tessa had planted trees to earn money for Abby's prom dress. And with prayer, somehow she's been resurrected. I had the privilege of her as an assistant at the Joseph Smith House for 6 months. And now she's working for what's it called, AmeriCorps. And she's living on her own and graduated from Graceland. Wow. A resurrected person. When you see your neighbors as resurrected persons, what difference does that make? Well, in Lamoni, not all of us are resurrected, but there's an awful lot of people with a lot of love. And I appreciate that's one of the reasons people come. I think maybe the next stage would be for David and Jan to come in 1977.
How much time do you need?
You just talk.
Tell your story. Tell your story.
Tell my story. You can't do that in the time frame we've got. Can you hear me? I have a real problem in this room. I can hear nothing in this room. The volume is fine, but the enunciation, I don't hear anything. This is my microphone to my hearing aids, and it bypasses everything in the room. So I can hear Paul and Linda, but I haven't been able to hear except through this. Anyway, I'm not sure how many of the rest of you can hear in this room either, but tell my story. Let me very quickly. Yes, I grew up on the farm. I did not get great joy in fixing barbed wire fences. I did not get a thrill milking a cow and getting hit in the side of the head with a cockleburr manure loaded hay.
Don't leave off the manure.
So when I graduated from Lamoni High School, I left the farm and never looked back. But growing up on the farm, I also spent a lot of time on the tractor. I could do the 18 hours, 16 to 18 hours on the tractor, a lot more than I could chasing those dumb cows and pigs around. And so everybody that I knew, the counselor, "David, you ought to go into engineering. How about mechanical engineering?" So I went to Graceland 2 years and then to Iowa State to get my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. And by my senior year, I knew I wasn't where I ought to be. Didn't know for sure where I wanted to be, but Mom and Dad had both been teachers, and I liked the idea of teaching, so I switched to education. That meant another year somewhere I had to go to get the education degrees. So where do you go? Back to Graceland. Fortunately, because that's where I got Jan, as well as my education. And so then 14 years later, I'm teaching in a suburb of Kansas City, teaching earth science. I had my master's in earth science by that time. I was teaching earth science. I had 6 classes a day of earth science, averaged about 36 students per class, which means I had some classes that were over 40 students in the classroom. I was trying to teach it experimentally, do it, try it. Well, how do you do that with 40 people? And I was in trouble. It just was not working well for me at all. I needed something else. And then up the street, at the end of the block, neighbor boy stabbed one of his playmates. And I knew we needed to get someone, we needed it out of there. We needed someplace else. On July 7th, 1977, put those dates together, that's 7/7/77. Jan saw an advertisement for programmer analysis position at Graceland College. It was college back then. And I had been using the computer in the classroom. That's the way I was able to keep track of progress. These 200 plus students I was seeing every day. And I was doing other things with the students in the classroom. I was using the computer to develop other things for me. The school district decided that computers in the classroom didn't make any sense. And so they took away all my access to computer. And so, so I needed to move. But Jan was convinced that I could do anything I wanted to on the computer. So she convinced me to apply at Graceland. So after seeing the advertisement, I applied at Graceland, surprisingly got hired, started to work August 1st. You think about that, moving, family, everything. Didn't even know about the job until the 7th, and I started work on the 1st of August. So things came together perfectly. Jan said very frequently, I brought David home. So we moved back to Lamoni. Linda was 13. Steve was about 12. Phil was about 6. Tough time for a young lady to move, but I think it was a good move. We raised our family here in Lamoni. But I buried myself, in a sense, at the computer center at Graceland, because Graceland was just moving to automate the administrative systems, and that was my job. So there were some of those all-night situations. There were some weekend situations. So I was tied up at Graceland on the computer center. But Jan, fortunately, started making a mark in the community. There was a service this Christmas, something about remembering things. One person commented, I really miss Jan Debarthe's smile. Those of you who knew and met Jan know what she was saying. When Jan greeted you with that smile, there's that phrase, her smile lights up the room. That fit Jan. And Jan knew your name. She'd visit with you just for a few minutes and see you years later and call you by name. She had a gift for that. She knew your name. So she had no problem being that way. Jan also loved to walk around the community. She had her route, but it varied sometimes. She would stop along the way to help out. Something happening, she could see you were doing something and needed a hand, she'd stop and help you out. Became very well acquainted with a lot of people that way. Oh, she kept track of people's anniversaries, birth dates. And many of you may remember, you may have gotten greetings or cards from Jan because she kept pretty careful records. Everybody she met, if she got their anniversary date, she recorded it. She would remember, and she would let you know, this is your anniversary, this is your birthday. Jan was an excellent piano player. I'm not enough musician to say that she was perfect, but she did an excellent job playing the piano. In fact, until the arthritis got so bad that she could no longer do it, she would go every Wednesday to the care center. And they have their hymn books, music, whatever anybody requested, she would play it for them. Just bring up the music and she'd play it for them while they sang. And so she did that, I think, every Wednesday for several years before it reached the point where her arthritis wouldn't let her do that anymore. We fairly frequently got phone calls, like about 8 o'clock Sunday morning from somebody somewhere in the area telling us, Jan, our pianist can't make it this morning. Would you come to our church service this morning and play the piano for us? And Jan, unless she was scheduled elsewhere, did. So as far as Albia on the east, and Preston on the west, and Osceola on the north, and Andover on the south.
Bethany.
Bethany. Yeah, Bethany on the south. Thank you. And then in between all those are the boundaries. In between all those, if you needed a pianist and Jan was available, she would go play. And whatever the people had decided to have for hymns that Sunday, you would sit down and play them. Our hymn book has what, over 600 hymns in it? Tell Jan the one you wanted, and she would play it. Really remarkably that way. Well, one particular special Sunday, special in my memory anyway, we went to the Lamoni church together, sitting in the pew, and Jan turned to me and said, I've got to go to Andover. So she got up and left. When she got to Andover, she found that the people in charge were struggling. Their pianist had not come. They had no pianist, and they also had no one with a strong voice to lead a cappella. So what were they going to do? Yeah, so Jan walked in and said, God sent me, and played the piano for them. After Jan had left us, I wasn't planning to, I'll tell that story anyway. A few days after Jan left, as I was just laying down to go to sleep, I suddenly, for about 2 seconds, saw a huge choir out in front of me. Not long enough to notice anybody, just this huge choir. Jan and the host of heaven, I'm convinced. Music was an important part of her life. So then we had a piano. What am I going to do with a piano? Linda didn't need a piano. Her granddaughters both have. Linda, as many of you know, Linda has been a pianist, organist for many years.
Decades.
Our granddaughters both played piano. My great granddaughter is now learning to play the piano, but they all have pianos. They didn't need Jan's piano. What do I do with Jan's piano? And so I tried to give it away, and finally found a family that was taking lessons from Jack Ergo and didn't have a piano to practice with. So I told them they could have Jan's piano, but I got a plaque that says the Janice Debarthe piano, that is fastened to the piano, and an envelope with a letter it goes in the piano bench saying, when you have finished using this piano, donate it to someone else that they may also learn to play the piano. And so somewhere down the road, one of your descendants may be privileged enough to learn to play the piano on the Janice Debarthe piano. And so that's our contribution to the Lamoni, let's see, what's the term? The appeal of Lamoni. That's our appeal to Lamoni, is basically through Jan and us being here. We've been here now since 1977. That's quite a few years to live in the same community. And we're just thrilled to be here.
I suspected I would need to be brief. So briefly, I will just share how for generations for our family, a big part of the appeal of Lamoni was the ties to education, and that Lamoni has always boasted strong educations. So Audrey and John, oh, they're no longer up there, but Audrey and John, no, it's okay. They first became acquainted with each other or noticing each other when they were students in one of the elementary schools in Lamoni, which some of you might remember the Al Blair series in the Chronicle a few years ago, where he talked about all the elementary schools in Lamoni at the same time. So Lori talked about how much bigger the elementary school was when she taught there. At one point, Lamoni boasted several schools because there were so many kids. Anyway, so that's how they first got to know each other, was in a Lamoni school. And then my story was that Joe walked back here for education. When Joe and Enid got married, he told her he could afford a wedding ring or a year at Graceland, but not both. So she chose the year at Graceland, of course. Anyone who remembers Enid would not be surprised by that. But then nature took its course, and she got pregnant with Dad, and they kicked her out of school because she was a bad influence. And so one of her professors said, well, I can't give you credit for the class, but you can still come and sit in. So she did that until the dean of students saw her and took her by the arm and escorted her off campus and said, do not come back here in your condition, because, you know, a married pregnant woman was a bad influence. So there was that. And so, yes, then our family moved back here for Dad to work at Graceland. And it was a hard year for me to move here at 13. And I've been in an excellent school district in Shawnee Mission, Kansas. And I got to repeat some of the things the next year in Lamoni, where my 7th grade class had over 400 students. My 8th grade class in Lamoni had 24 students, and they had us split in 2 sections. But because the school was small, they could adapt and they would personalize things. And I got an excellent education. And then my daughters got an excellent education here. And Graceland was part of that. The public schools were part of that. And my mother's family also lived here just for a brief period of time when my grandfather worked for the church here. And so my my impression is that there was one year when all 4 of the Simons, so Mom, her brother, her mother, and her father, took classes at Graceland, and Dad, and Enid, and Uncle Jerry. I think I had 7 family members here in 1 year. So, and then of course I taught here for almost 30 years. Dad taught here. Yeah, we love education, but we love Lamoni, and it's nurtured our family for generations very well.
Wow. And I got to start in the Thompson one-room country school 5 miles west. And that one-room country school beginning gave me the chance to see my big brothers and the other neighborhood kids reciting their lessons, and as a kindergartner, to see all the people up through 8th grade doing their studies, learning what they're learning, you follow along. And so what a marvelous background it offered. As a professional teacher, I was attracted by Don Dessler at KU, who pulled together 12 people that he thought were master teachers. And he followed us for a few years and had us write our diaries and share our stories. And we discovered that of the 12 of us that he found to be master teachers, 7 had started in a one-room country school. But to go then from that one-room country school to Lamoni for grade school, and Glenn Bixby as a music teacher for 12 years, Blue and Gray as a sophomore, Oklahoma as a junior, South Pacific as a senior. It was an awesome. I learned more history from that music teacher than I did from all the other music teachers or history teachers put together, I think. But it was a preparation for a career as a teacher. And I very much appreciate that our family has been so blessed with education in Illinois.
And I love the fact that when I lived here, I lived in a renovated one-room school.
Jared, don't get upset at.
I do want to back up on what other elements of the family. In 1952, our little sister died at 2 years old. I remember going to the barn and finding in the oat bin, there was a cat that had just had kittens. And so I went to the house to get Joy to come and enjoy the kittens with me. I couldn't get her to get up out of her bed. And so I went to the clothesline where Mom was and asked her to help me get Joy to come enjoy the kittens, and Mom was in tears. When we got to the back door of the porch, I'd been told since that there was a chrysalis. This was March of 1952, but here nonetheless was a chrysalis opening and a butterfly coming out. And Mom took that as a significant signal. I had the dream, I think probably that night, in which I saw Joy sitting on the lap of Jesus, and having her questions answered and playing with a little sheep that he'd given her. And so, of course, I asked for the sheep. I should have been asking the questions, I guess. But Mom and Dad then, with the grief that came from the loss of their only little girl, developed a compassion that made it so that the rest of their lives, they were ministers to people who lost children. And when our brother Jerry died, that was half of their kids that they lost. But then here is one of the interesting stories of Lamoni. Joseph Smith III lost 7 of his first 14 children before they got to be adults.
I've got to interrupt. Paul goes off on these things. I want to say, I'm still a student at Graceland. I have a valid student ID. I take a class at least once a semester. I'm not this semester because I went to Costa Rica, but I've taken a class every semester for years. And I get to audit the classes, so I don't have to do any exams. I don't have to do any homework I don't want to do. But I've been a valid student here at Graceland since I retired in 2014. Just the student side.
Well,
Now, Paul, you can go back off on some other wild theme.
okay. Yes, and I should, because another parallel I'd like to draw is that as the host and site director at the Joseph Smith III site, I get to advocate for a place and people of peace. In January, I had the privilege of climbing Mount Sinai, which in history is the place where God spoke to Moses. And to go to a place like that where you get to hear the message of peace and have the origins of it whispered to you, to be so immeasurably profound. So the educational process for me is also a spiritual education. And I want to submit that as we explore together what it is to be community, to be able to breathe a bit of peace with every bit of breath we have, to breathe a bit of love, is the message that I got from South Mount Sinai, and it's a message that I believe Joseph Smith was wanting to send out from the benchmark that we now have as the museum benchmark for Lamoni. And I believe that it is a significant message for Lamoni to move into its future.
Are there any questions?